Mother Goldbits. I sell mystery elixir, and it is full of beautiful things. I have things in here that you have been brought from all over the world. I have traveled from Bangalore to Shanghai down to Patagonia. That's way down in Argentina. But I'm going to tell you a story right now about the time I went to Cairo, Egypt. Now, Cairo is the land of the pharaohs. When you get to that there city, you go to this really, really fancy hotel full of tourists, and each and every one of them says, you ain't been to Egypt unless you go up the Nile. So I keep saying, I'm a girl from Mississippi. I know all about the Mississippi River, and I know that that river goes down. How am I going to get up the Nile? They said, well, we got them boats. They're called dhows. I said, dhows? Yep, dhows. And I said, well, how am I going to get one of them dhows? They said, well, follow all the other tourists up to the Nile, and you can get right on board. Even Mark Twain's running on one of them things. I said, well, I got to do that. So I go down to the river, I pay me some money, and I get into a dhow, and it's being steered by all these men. These men are in nightshirts. Now, I'd be afraid of nightshirts, but see, I had 3 husbands. Not one of them would drink my elixir. That is why I'm a free woman today. Now, you got to understand, this is an elixir that's going to keep you alive for a long time. So, I'm going up the Nile in this dhow with the red sails in the sunset and all those men in the nightshirts, and I get to the Great Pyramids of Giza. Now, they's big. They's bigger than that big old mill up the street. And there's nothing there. There's nothing there except more men in nightshirts and camels. Now, those camels are nasty. You do not want to tangle with one of them. They're going to bite you, and then they're going to spit you right in the eye. But I do see these 3 men. These 3 strange men. Now, these is young men. They're in blue uniforms, all tattered and torn. They ain't got no shoes on their feet no more. And they're babbling away. And I said, well, they don't look typical. I'm going to walk up to them and I'm going to ask them who they are, because I am an inquiring person. So I go up to them and I said, excuse me, you do not appear to be from these here parts. And they said, no, madame. Well, that sounded peculiar. And I said, I could see you have a blue uniform. Ain't no Yankee uniform. No, madame, it is not. I said, well, what is that? They said, we are the soldiers of Napoleon Bonaparte. I said, Napoleon Bonaparte? Wait a minute. He'd been dead since 1821. That means you would have been here for 75 years. I do not believe you are young men. Yes, madame. We are the soldiers and we are waiting the emperor. I said, this makes no sense. So as I get closer, I notice they ain't got no teeth. How could these young men have no teeth? All right, this is the first mystery to be solved. So I asked them, why ain't you got no teeth? They said, madame, we have been here in the desert for 75 years, making croissants out of inferior wheat. And nothing but sand. Of course you would have no teeth. It's all ground down. I said, well, that explains that, but it still don't explain why you still so young. I said, that, madame, is the mystery of the pharaohs. Well, don't you know, mystery is my middle name? I have to find this out. Now, how am I going to get this information from these Frenchmen? They're very reticent. I said, well, then I noticed when we coming up the Nile, there are all these English people. Now, you know that them English people come and they always have big picnic baskets full of food because they won't eat no foreign food. So I go up to them and I said, you got some wine in there? Well, of course we do. Who do you think we are? We travel well. I said, well, can I buy some from you? And I offered them a little bit of silver. Well, they sold me 3 bottles of wine, one for each one of them fellers up over by the pyramid. So I brought it to them. Well, clearly they had not had wine in a long time because they were ecstatic. They drank it all down. They danced in front of a great big fire pit like the one over there. And they was dancing And suddenly I was feeling good and they was feeling good. Well, I was even feeling a little bit young. And they were all dancing like the Egyptians. So I said to them, you know, I've been mighty kind to you. I brought you some wine. I've been pleasant. Are you going to tell me your mystery? And my candle went out. Well, that's so much for my hot air. Anyway, they said, Madam, we will tell you our mystery, but frankly, we are very ashamed. They hung their heads. I said, don't be ashamed. You're nice fellows. They said, okay. Well, here's the story they gave me. They said when the Emperor Napoleon left them all alone, they was cold. They was freezing in the desert. It gets cold at night. And I said, I do believe that because that there big statue of a cat had his nose froze off. And I said, tell me the rest. They said, well, we needed to burn something. So what could we burn? Could we chase these men, steal their nightshirts and burn it? It doesn't burn very long, and then you have these hairy men running around. We do not like that. Can you burn camels? Well, first you have to catch them, they bite you, they spit at you, and when you burn them, they smell. We only had one choice. We had to go into the pyramid and steal the mummies. Yes, the mummies, we are ashamed. Even though they are 4,000 years old, they still look a little bit youthful, and better than us, they have their teeth. So we have been burying these mummies. We were burying them tonight. Do you feel youthful? Do you feel wonderful? And as you burn them, the sparks go through the air, and you never ever age. And we can prove this to you. It has been 75 years, and except for our teeth, we are still young enough. I said, well, that's proof enough for me. It is proof enough for Mother Colpit's mystery elixir. I told you it was going to be a proven recipe. So I gave them a $20 gold piece. I sent them into the pyramid. I had them collect me some of the mummies up and put them in the dowels so I could bring them to you in the United States. And here we are. I even gave them a little bit of money, got them to Paris, got some new choppers, and now they're dancing in the Folie Bergère in their nightshirts. So now, I'm not going to sell you this for $1, 75 cents, 50 cents, 25 cents, even a dime. 6 cents. 6 cents. I can solve your problems, and I can keep you alive forever. What do you think? Mother Colpit's mystery elixir.
Welcome to Chicago. Herbert Henry Holmes at your service. I come from New Hampshire, and I attended the University of Vermont Medical School and then later the University of Massachusetts, where I fell head over heels for Clara Leveling, and we eloped on the 4th of July. After I finished my education, and I left Clara behind, I moved to New York to seek my fame and fortune. I began teaching, and then later practicing medicine. And it was at that point where I discovered a very, very widespread shortage of corpses for medical education. I found great opportunity in this. Selling cadavers became very profitable for me. In 1886, I moved to Chicago, and I came across the Holton drugstore, where I found poor old Mrs. Holton in a distraught state. Her husband lay in the apartment upstairs, dying of cancer. She opened her heart to me, and she confessed that running the drugstore and tending to her dying husband's needs had become a very, very stressful situation. I said to her, "Dear Mrs. Holton, please allow me to relieve some of your stress. I am a licensed physician and pharmacist. Turn the drugstore over to me, and I will turn it into a lucrative proposition. Why, I will even completely conquer the competition down the block." And that's exactly what I did. Well, before too long, the Holtons expired, And now my H.H. Holmes drugstore is a rousing success. Many, many young and new patrons flock eagerly to all of my promotions. Why, I've even created a tonic to cure baldness and alcoholism. Sales are booming. And I've also established a jewelry store, a barber shop, and a restaurant. Oh, this is a great place to be. Chicago is growing by leaps and bounds. Why, we now have over 25,000 people working in the cattle stockyards. And if you can overcome the stench, you find great prosperity there and all over Chicago. However, there is a decided lack of apartments. So I began renting out rooms upstairs. I married Myrta in January, and she is young, and she is blonde, and she is stunningly beautiful. She left her little hometown in near Minneapolis, and she moved to the big city, and now she helps me run the drugstore. The Chicago World's Fair is going to bring in millions of people to Chicago. So I built the World's Fair Hotel directly across the street from the drugstore. It's got more than 70 rooms on 2 floors, and I've even established a very successful glass bending business in the hotel building, along with many retail shops and even a doctor's office. You are now standing in the vault of that hotel. I had this built to house all of my valuables and all of my records for safekeeping. It is soundproof. It is airtight. Allow me to demonstrate. I'll step outside, and then I'll close the door, and I'll scream at the top of my lungs. You see if you can hear me. Have a nice day.
John Mortensen, the author of the Oxford Book of Villains, writes, "It is a powerful Satan who convinces men to sell their souls. Villains have been written in song and poem ever since Cain murdered Abel. Some villains have no qualms of conscience and show no remorse. Criminality takes many forms, from the pickpocket to the con man. Some scoundrels have mastered the pitiless art of seduction. Other unscrupulous swindlers betray their countries." End quote. Good evening. My name is Inspector Randall, and I've worked here at Scotland Yard for some time. I've been interested in criminology all my life. Criminology, it's a science. It's anthropology and biology. It's about the body. It's psychiatry and psychology. It's about the mind. It's economics. It's that lust for power and greed that breeds in all classes, all races, and both genders. Here at Scotland Yard, we have started something new. After all, it's 1888. We want to be modern. So we have started the Black Museum. We're collecting evidence from the different crimes, and we're using it to study so that we can teach all of the new detectives how to do their work. So over here on this shelf in our Black Museum, we have some death masks. Some of them are from the victims of the crimes. We have some weapons, pointed weapons for impaling and penetrating, sharp-edged weapons, blunt trauma weapons. And these are overt and concealed weapons. See that umbrella? That's a shotgun. Over here we have some evidence. Right now we're working on the big case, Jack the Ripper. We have some of his letters and some of the photographs of the victims that we are studying as we work hard to catch this thief, catch this murderer, Jack the Ripper. This is a map that shows the sites of the murders. Now, over here, some of the philosophy of criminality comes from these fellows. This guy right here, Adolphe Quetelet, he's a Belgian fellow. He has studied crime and demographics, and he says that most criminals are poor, uneducated, young adult males. This next guy, Cesare Lombroso, an Italian fellow, he says that criminals are born criminals. They inherit their craft from their relatives. They're born criminals. They're calling him the father of modern criminology. He has studied criminals and insane people and normal individuals. He worked for a time in an asylum where he studied insanity. And he has decided that people not only are born criminals, but that they can be detected by physical features. So, he has come up with a list. For instance, most criminals are tall. They have enlarged jaws, high cheekbones, glassy eyes. Some are bald. Many have tattoos. He also says that thieves have great dexterity and little beady eyes. And murderers definitely have that staring, glassy look. He says that women criminals are far more ruthless than men, and he describes them as dark-haired, wrinkled, with smaller skulls than usual. This guy over here, this is Alphonse Bertillon, the Frenchman, and he has come up with a way to identify criminals by measuring their body parts. So as you can see here, he measures the forearm, the neck, the head, the crown of the head. He measures body parts so that we can start to make identification of these criminals. How else will we share information, say with the Pinkerton private eyes over in the United States? The only way that we can transfer information is by a letter or a telegraph. And a lot of these criminals, they commit crimes in one country and then they move on. So with this information, we'll be able to identify some of these criminals and start keeping records. And now, a new thing, and this was developed by a Brit, finally a Brit, dactylography. Do you know of it? Do you know, have you heard of it? Fingerprinting. Take a look. So right over here, you can take your finger and put it on the paper, and the mark shows the various loops and arches in a fingerprint. So we'll be able to identify the criminals. Now, so you go to the crime scene and you get a drinking glass or a doorknob, and you take the fingerprint and you try to make a match. So, anybody want to try to do their fingerprints? These sheets say Lee Harvey Oswald. Just ignore that. Ladies and gentlemen, 10% of the population are criminals, and we're going to catch as many as we can.
Gentlemen and ladies at a dissection, what is the country coming to? Next, a lady will be standing for Prime Minister. Who knows what may come of that? I am Dr. Robert Knox, lecturer on human anatomy here at the University of Edinburgh. Since my time as an army surgeon at Wellington's great victory over Napoleon at Waterloo, I have worked tirelessly to improve the understanding of human anatomy and the practice of surgery. Edinburgh is now a great world center of such learning. Doctors come here from as far away as America to hone their skills. Unfortunately, the government has decreed that the only bodies suited for cadavers and for dissection are those of prisoners, suicides, orphans, and foundlings. There are not enough such bodies to satisfy the demand. As you can see, I have no cadaver prepared for today's lesson. Mr. Patterson, have you obtained a cadaver, or are you obliging enough to volunteer yourself? Call me Dr. Knox. Mr. Burke, Mr. Hare, my favorite Irish resurrection men.
Evening, Dr. Knox.
All come through at the pinch again, I see. Let me examine your wares before I offer payment. No maggots, no beetles, no grave mold, no reek of decay, no rigor mortis. A right fresh cadaver, and a young one too.
Quite a screamer, wasn't she, Mr. Burke? And when all that gin we gave her, and then with you on top of her, I could hardly put the pillow on her face.
Ah, yes, Mr. Hare. But hush. Dr. Knox might be hard of hearing, but his students are probably not.
Go, tell Patterson to give you £10 for your work. Same again tomorrow, if you bring another. That is, if you can hold off on the carousing and the drinking.
I know that little girl. That's Carrie. She was on Canal Street just yesterday begging, right as rain.
Maybe, but a lot can happen between one day and the next. She'll be begging no more.
Lady, I'd be hush if I were you, if you get my meaning.
Say, Mr. Burke, one of my tenants is a little bit ill as of late. Have you any of the gin left?
Enough, Mr. Hare, enough.
Good.
We shall now commence the anatomy lesson. I shall begin by opening the chest and abdominal cavities and removing and examining the organs. Then we will strip back the skin on an arm and a leg to study the muscle structure before moving to the head. There, I will remove an eye and then saw off the top of the skull to examine the brain.
Welcome to my costume and disguise shop. My name is Madame Mysteriosa. I deal in quality disguises to satisfy your vanities, your fantasies, and your malevolencies. Perhaps you wish to follow in the steps of the great master of disguise, Charles Peace, who would enter a place he wished to rob, whether a residence or a business, in a full suit of clothes, which he wore over another entirely different outfit. He would rob the place, and then before leaving, cover his very fair skin with walnut oil to make himself appear much darker, of an entirely different race, very hard to identify. Or perhaps you're of a more benevolent nature and wish to emulate Emma Coleman Ladd, a sculptor who, after World War I, set out to create masks to cover the disfigurement caused by exploding shells in the faces of those allies on the battlefield. She was awarded honors by the French government. Or perhaps you wish to disguise the appearance of your gender, as did Cathay Williams. Born a slave in America, she wished to join the United States Army after the Civil War when she was granted her freedom. But as today in 1917, women were considered entirely too frail to fight in the front lines. She was not too frail to work in the fields as a slave, but she overcame the discrimination by binding her breasts, lowering her voice, and pretending to become a man. She got away with it for quite some time, as had Deborah Sampson before her in the American Revolution, doing much the same thing. She actually dug a musket ball out of her leg because she feared detection. And she got away with it for 2 more years before they finally discovered she was a woman. She was eventually retired from the Army with a pension. So, you may wish to change your gender or your race, or you may simply wish to become invisible. Close your eyes. Try to remember the appearance of the person who delivers ice to your home, or the little boy who climbs your chimney to clean it, or the woman who scrubs the front steps of your building, or the old lamplighter who lights the lamps on your street. You pay them no mind. They might as well be invisible. Invisible enough, perhaps, to get away with murder. I know my prices are a tad high, but the workmanship is exquisite, and my discretion is absolute. So come back when you have a bit more leisure time to inspect my wares. And in the meantime, I suggest you follow along to Fleet Street. And I understand the meat pies there are especially tasty.
Hello, sir. Please come. Get a shave by Sweeney Todd. This will be a sweet, tender young one for Mrs. Lovett's pies. pies smell fresh today.
The pie's gotten so much better since Mr. Sweeney moved out there. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? That aroma enriching the breeze. You can't imagine the raptures in store, just inside of this door. There you'll sample Mrs. Lovett's meat pies, savory and sweet pies, as you'll see. Seems a downright shame. Such an awful waste. Such a nice plump frame, what's his name has. Had. Business needs a lift. Debts to be erased. Think of it as thrift. As a gift, if you get my drift. With the price of meat, what it is, when you get it, if you get it, got it? Have a little priest. It's too good, at least. It's really rather fresh. Not too much fat. Only where it's set. The trouble with poet is how do you know it's deceased? Try the priest. Oh, Mr. Todd. Bless my eyes. Fresh supplies. Mrs. Mooney's got a pie shop. Business never better. Serving only pussycats and toast. But a pussy's good for maybe 6 or 7 at the most. Ugh, pussycats. My secret, my dears? Family recipe. It's all about the herbs. Things like being careful with your coriander. That's what makes the gravy grander. Well, that and Mr. Todd.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and children of all ages. do clowns make you nervous? Do you feel tense or feel your heart race? Do you get anxious or angry? Do you feel like you want to scream or cry? These feelings are common amongst people. So common, in fact, that there's a clinical name, coulrophobia, or the irrational and intense fear of clowns. Now, it's a mistake to ask when clowns went bad, because they were never really good. The Trickster was a 16th century clown from the Italian theater. He was both comical, but yet unprincipled in his ways. The Harlequin is identified by his elaborate masks and diamond-shaped patterns, and most people recognize him to this day. Now, in the 1920s and 30s, there was a silent film called He Who Gets Slapped, about a menacing and vengeful clown. And in the 30s, a prankster villain named Joker made his way into the Batman comic books. But then in the 1950s and 60s, American audiences were asked to get into a more happy clown. Those I think you would recognize as Ronald McDonald and Bozo the Clown, and of course, Clarabelle. But then in the late 1970s, the persona of the clown shifted once again. The news was reporting people dressed as clowns, committing crimes of violence and even murder. Stephen King's novel It was about a scary and supernatural clown that went through the suburbs murdering children. Yes, clowns. You can identify them by their colorful wigs and funny makeup, their white gloves and their exaggerated footwear, and their colorful costumes. Clowns. The perfect disguise for villains.
I suppose you'll be wanting to hear about the murders too. I'll tell you my story. I've told it near 100 times already. Same thing I told the police, don't you be knowing? Mr. Pardon went out for morning errands, and I was washing windows. Miss Lizzie was out back, I think at the barn loft. Somebody must have come up the back stairs, or climbed through a window and murdered Mrs. Barton upstairs, in the guest chambers. I don't exactly know when Mr. Barton came back, but Lizzie found him killed dead too, with an axe, in the parlor, about 11:15. What a lot of blood. Never seen the lights of it, but quite the frights in me. Maybe it was a robber, trying to steal stuff, and got caught in the act. But Miss Lizzie and me can't find nothing missing. I counted that silver near 100 times. We keep the front door locked, mostly, and the back door latched, unless we're out in the yard chopping wood, or in the barn. But come to think of it, I should have noticed. Miss Lizzie and her stepmother were sometimes bickering, touch be on. Miss Lizzie was always saying we should move to a grandier house on a hill. Too late now. I didn't touch anything. Police said don't touch anything. Don't clean anything. Those blood stains ain't never coming out of that carpet, don't you be knowing. They also said they think Miss Lizzie did it. Never in all my time here did I ever see that kind of fury out of her. I don't know. I just don't know.
State your full name.
Lizzie Andrew Borden.
And you looked in at the door?
I opened the door and rushed back.
Saw his face?
No, I did not see his face. He was all covered in blood.
You saw where the face was bleeding?
Yes, sir.
Did you see the blood on the floor?
No, sir.
You saw his face covered with blood?
Yes, sir.
Did you see his eyeball hanging out?
No, sir.
See the gashes where his face was laid open?
No, sir.
Nothing of that kind?
No, sir.
District Attorney Hosea Knowlton, representing the Commonwealth. May it please your honors, Mr. Foreman and gentlemen of the jury. In the matter of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts versus Lizzie Andrew Borden, the evidence speaks for itself. At the Borden home in Fall River, police found no signs of forced entry, despite the fact that the Bordens habitually locked their doors and nothing appeared to have been stolen. Miss Sullivan, the family maid, testified that Miss Borden was the only other person she saw in the home on the morning the murders were committed. The likely murder weapon, the axe covered with blood, was found at the scene, even though that blood later suspiciously disappeared. This claw-headed hatchet perfectly fits this fatal indentation on the skull of Andrew Borden. The claw head of the hatchet made this grievous mark. Miss Sullivan testified that the day of the murders, Miss Borden wore a blue dress. Alice Russell, a family friend, said that the next day Miss Borden tore up a blue dress that had red stains on it, and that Miss Borden said she intended to burn it. The evening after the murders, police stationed around the house testified that Miss Borden entered the cellar carrying a kerosene lamp and a slop pail, accompanied by Miss Russell. One officer said both women left the cellar. Miss Borden then returned alone and appeared to be bending over the sink. Does this not explain how critical evidence might have gone missing? And why would an intruder who flees a crime scene be so fastidious about cleaning it up? Moreover, Miss Borden's relationship with her stepmother was known to have been strained. I ask you to consider whether Miss Borden might have resented the fact that her father was leaving property and substantial sums of money to the stepmother rather than to her. These facts point to just one conclusion, that Lizzie Andrew Borden is the only person who could have committed these gruesome murders. I remind you that 11 blows killed Mr. Borden and 18 blows killed Mrs. Borden.
George D. Robinson for the defendant. May it please your honors, Mr. Foreman, gentlemen of the jury, direct evidence in the form of eyewitness testimony is completely absent from this prosecution. No one has come forward as a witness to this crime. So the case against Miss Borden rests entirely on circumstantial evidence and assertions. Now, as to the burning of the blue dress, alleged to destroy evidence of a blood-stained garment, it was not blood on the dress, it was paint, and it was burned in the light of day, in full view of witnesses. Does this sound like the act of a guilty person trying to destroy evidence? Further, I would contend that murder committed with an axe will necessarily cover the perpetrator with blood. It's understood, self-evident, and yet the police found not a spot of blood upon the defendant, Miss Borden. What's more, the prosecution failed to establish a link in any way, shape, or fashion between Miss Borden and the weapon that they produced in evidence. Neither could they attribute any credible motive to her whatsoever. So I ask you, how could a young woman, 32 years of age, of spotless character and reputation, a member of the church who has performed many charitable works and has spent most of her life in Fall River, living there with her father, her stepmother, and her sister, how could this woman then turn and commit such a heinous crime as to shock the entire civilized world? It beggars the imagination. And I remind you, good citizens, of the shame that would fall upon us if we were to commit the sin of wrongful conviction with the whole country watching.
First victim, woman found dead with no less than 79 wounds on her body. Extra, extra!
Ma'am, do you have 6 pence, please? Sir, do you have 6 pence, please? Ma'am, do you have 6 pence, please?
Have you seen my daughter?
Sir,
She's been missing. Have you seen her?
Sir, excuse me, sir.
Oh.
Do you have 6 pence, please?
Good evening. My name is Inspector Aberline from the Central Office of Scotland Yard. It is my duty to report that in the early hours of yesterday morning, another murder of a most revolting and fiendish character took place in Spitalfield. What we saw, I cannot drive away from my mind. It seemed more like the work of the devil than of a man. And it is of the opinion that in headquarters that this fresh crime was committed by the same hand as the previous ones, known to the public as Jack the Ripper.
Excuse me, Inspector. I'm a journalist for the London Times. We'd like to know, your whole public would like to know, just how and when do you think you will apprehend this Jack the Ripper, as you call him?
I am here this evening to speak to the public, to find out whether anyone has any information of a suspicious nature that they would like to report to us. We would be very grateful for any news, any information.
All well and good, sir, and with all due respect, the police are doing a pitiful job, and it seems that in the letters that we get from Jack that he's almost laughing at me. He said in his letters, he said, you keep saying that you have a fix on me, but while you sound so clever saying it, I know you don't. And then he writes, laughter, ha, ha, ha.
I have sent a telegram to Sir Charles Warren to bring the bloodhounds out to see if they can find a trace to follow this murderer by, if possible.
In prior correspondence, he said that Scotland Yard is asleep. And now with bloodhounds, he's even said that he will prove it to you by his next victim. He will do a double.
This poor woman's body was found lying on a bed, undressed. She had been completely disemboweled and her entrails taken out and placed on the table. Her nose was cut off and her face gashed beyond recognition. Her 2 breasts had been cut clean away and placed next to her liver and her entrails on the table. I have heard a great deal about the murders in Spitalfield. But I declare to God that I never expected to see such a sight, and I never expect to see such a sight again.
But alas, sir, there will be more. There will be more. Because he says, Jack says, I shan't stop cutting until you have me in shackles. He said the last lady that I did, I put the knife in so precisely that she didn't have a chance to squeal. And he said, the next one I do, I'm going to cut off both her ears, put them in a box, and send them to the police officers. He signs it, yours truly, Jack the Ripper, my trade name.
These letters are extremely unlikely to have been written by the murderer. Indeed, evidence gives credence to the theory that they were written by reporters, like yourself perhaps, just to keep this crime alive.
You're accusing me, sir. Accusing me of writing the truth just to make a penny? Well, this runs cold in my veins. The same stories, the same images. Jack has promised that one of his victims, he will cut both of her kidneys out. He will take one of them and preserve it, sending one to you with your name on it. And then the other, he has promised that he will slice, season, and fry, and dine on it.
I suppose
He will send you his knife as a clue, because you are doing so poor a job in catching. So he signs this letter, catch me if you can.
What? What's that? What's that? Oh my God. God, I got it. Where did he go? Where did he go? Where?
Hello. Welcome to the Archer Home for the Elderly and Infirm here in Windsor, Connecticut. We help the elderly live out their lives in the comfort of our lovely home, and even settle them in at the cemetery once that's needed. My name is Amy Archer Gilligan, but you can call me Sister Amy.
Well, I'm almost finished filling out the contract. Do you know what the date is?
Oh, it's September 29th, 1912.
Thank you.
Are you thirsty?
Yes.
Did you remember to pick up that package I asked you for?
Yes, I have it right here.
Thank you very much. Have a sip. I would send my boarders to the pharmacy to pick up the arsenic for the rats. Have a little more, please. How are you feeling? Are we going to have to call the doctor later?
In the 7 years that Amy Archer Gilligan ran the Archer Home in Windsor, reports show that 66 of her guests passed away. Amy also lost 2 husbands in the same time period. A shrewd Hartford Courant reporter is the one who finally sounded the alarm. And at that point, one of the bodies of her lodgers was exhumed, and an autopsy found unusually high levels of arsenic in the tissue. Suspicion also fell on Dr. King, the Archer Home physician. He was also the town medical examiner, responsible for signing the death certificates. But with no concrete evidence, no charges were filed against him. But Sister Amy was indicted, tried for murder, and condemned to death. She appealed and was granted a second trial. The judge found her insane, and she was sent to the Connecticut Home for the Insane in Middletown. She remained there until the end of her days in 1962.
Did you have another sip, Rosa? Another rat. Well, we'd better move along, unless you want to board with Sister Amy.
She may have a bed for you tomorrow.
Good evening.
Thank you for coming all the way to Chicago, Inspector Geyer.
Thank you, Sergeant Norton.
I hear you have Holmes locked up there in Philadelphia on a murder charge. Your supervisor said that we should look into Holmes's business here in Chicago from 2 years ago during the Chicago Exposition.
Yes, sir. We do.
Yeah. Well, so let's go in.
We'd like to get to the bottom of this Holmes business.
So we've been scouring through the Holmes's building here, digging up the basement here and going through the upper floors looking for evidence. It's been kind of a challenging case because Holmes abandoned this building about 1.5 years ago when he left Chicago. And we think he was probably responsible for setting the fire up on the 3rd floor before he left. You know, we found some rather unusual evidence here. Are you sure you're ready for this?
Yes, sir, Sergeant Norton. I've been tracking Holmes from Toronto all the way to Indianapolis. Nothing can scare me now.
Well, you know, Holmes built this building. It takes up the whole block here. And he had stores on the 1st floor and he had rooms up on the 2nd and 3rd floors. He was telling people he was going to let those rooms out to folks coming here for the exposition.
How many guests do you think he had in this hotel of his?
Well, it's hard to say. He really didn't keep any records. One thing we found out, though, is he took out advertisements in Midwestern newspapers for young women to come and work for him. Thing was, when they came here, he took out life insurance policies on them. You know, it seems like every young woman that came in contact with Holmes seemed to disappear sooner or later, and unfortunately some kids, too.
So what have you found down here in the basement? Would you mind if I look things over, take some notes?
No, go right ahead. Well, let's start over here. So we think that Holmes used the basement here to dispose of his victims' bodies, like these that you see here.
So he lured his victims down here?
No, we think he committed most of the murders upstairs. You see, he had an office on the 3rd floor, and just outside of the office he had this big vault. It had a soundproof door on it. Also had a gas pipe going into it. So we think he committed some of the murders there.
This workbench over here, this large, it's like, have marks on it. What are those?
Oh, knife marks. See, Holmes learned how to dissect bodies during his medical training. I think he was dissecting bodies to get smaller parts that were easier to dispose of. Let me show you something over here. So when we dug up the floor, we found the body of this little girl. She was about 6 to 8 years old. Her body had been dismembered. Oh, and then he threw some lime on it from this barrel here to keep the smell down. Let me tell you a story we've been able to piece together from some of the evidence so far. This is about his stenographer, Miss Emmeline Sygren. It seems Miss Sygren came to him one day asking for her pay. He told her, well, we've got the money upstairs in my vault. So they went up to the vault, and when she walked in, he closed the soundproof door behind her and locked her in. Well, he might have left her in there for a few weeks, or maybe a little less if he turned the gas on, but either way, he now had a body to dispose of. Well, he had a bench like that upstairs next to his office, too. So when he opened the door, her body fell out. She'd been desperately trying to get out of the room. So he dismembered her body, too, to make it small enough pieces so he could put them into his office stove like we have over here. We went through the ashes in that stove, and we found 2 buttons and a watch chain from a young woman, and also some bone fragments.
Boy, the deeper we get into this case, the sicker it's making me.
Right over here, we found this acid vat. He would take some of his victims' bodies and put them in there to digest the flesh off the bones. He hired a man to come in and reassemble those bones like they started to do here into full skeletons. And he could sell those to medical schools around the area. Let me show you something over here that was kind of interesting. So we tore down a wall here, and behind it we found this 14-foot gas tank. Now he had told people that he was using that gas tank for his glass bending business, but that didn't make any sense. We discovered he probably modified it into an oven so he could burn some of the bodies. Are you going to be okay?
Yeah. Excuse me. He told us he killed 27 people.
Well, that may be. Well, we've got evidence for maybe around 10 or so, but there could be a lot more. Maybe over 100, more than that. Yeah, I don't think we're ever going to know for sure.
Murdered over 100. That's incredible. Massive people. Holmes. H.H. Holmes. He was a mass. Holmes was a mass murderer. Real sick.
This way, folks, we're going to take a step into the future, just for a moment.
Well, it's 30 years later, and I'm retiring. I remember when I was 21, I thought it would be such a grand thing to go into law enforcement. I was a damn fool. Now, it's been over 40 years now since we scoured through that god-awful basement in the Holmes murder castle. I just wonder how many victims we never found. I could still hear their voices calling out to me. How many did he kill? Some people said he killed over 200. He confessed to 27. Then he confessed to 2. Then he said, I didn't kill anybody, what's all the trouble? Just depended who was paying him for his story. Well, we got evidence for 9 for sure. We could never get enough evidence to piece it all together into a credible story. Well, they hung him there in Philadelphia, but his neck didn't break like it's supposed to. No, he just hung there for 20 minutes, twisting and gasping for air. And the stories. Well, some people say that wasn't him that died there. No, they said that he convinced the priests and the jailers that he was an innocent man. And they put some other body up there. And he took off to South America, to Paraguay, to grow coffee of all things. Well, they tore down that Holmes murder castle and they put up a post office there now. But Holmes isn't gone. No, his shadow still hangs over Chicago. And the true story of all his murders, why, that just passed off into eternity at the end of that rope in Philadelphia.